Hello, I'm your host, Fred Adelhelm, and welcome to today's episode of Negotiations, Truth, Lies, and Miracles. This is our podcast series, and today's series is number 3. The first one was about preparing for negotiations, and the second one was with Etu, who expressed their view via Joe Gallagher, their view in general on what they see is going to happen in 2025 in bargaining. And today we will be talking to UNITE's Ben Peterson. And Ben Peterson is the Assistant National Secretary of the union, and he will share his views and opinions on what the union sees as issues for bargaining in 2025.
Hello, Fred. How's it going?
Hi, morning, Ben. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
That's good. Cool. Yes, I'm well. I'm well. How's Auckland?
Auckland's good. Are you down in Wellington, are you?
Yes. Yeah. Which is
Cool.
been windy last couple of days, but the sun's out, so hopefully it stays well.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Well, that's good news. So, listen, thanks for agreeing to come onto the podcast. We basically have a series that we call Negotiations, Truth, Lies, and Miracles. Because at the end of the day, bargaining is bargaining, and yeah, parties have different views as to what they can achieve and they can't achieve, et cetera, et cetera. So we just try and assist, give guidance where we can, talk to both management as well as unions, and generally try and expedite a deal that's workable in the broader New Zealand context. So that's really our role. So I do appreciate you coming and sharing some of your views, and I accept that your views may be, some of it may be your own views and opinions, and may not reflect, your union's overall priorities, etc. I get that, and I've had discussions in the past on this series with Joe Gallagher of Etu, and he expressed, his views and opinions in terms of what we can expect in 2025, because that's really what we're trying to hear from you, your view, as well as obviously Unite's priorities for negotiations, especially in the first 6 months of 2025. I mean,
Mhm.
given all the drama around the world and within New Zealand, who knows what's going to trigger the next crisis. So, although
Mm.
we can ramble on about what we think is going to happen, by tomorrow things may be very different.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, if you and maybe we can then elaborate on those particular issues. The first question is really as a consultant and as a person who's practiced in industrial relations and worked with unions, not only in New Zealand but Australia and the US, UK. The view generally in New Zealand is things are tough. Settlements are tending to be low. However, having just conducted a recent SNAP survey of companies that have settled in bargaining with their unions and predominantly in the private sector, the surprising feedback was that actual settlements are still around the 4% mark, whereas quite a few employers, some of the medium to larger employers, have started talking about that, the economy is so bad that in fact a zero wage percent increase is potentially what they would maybe looking at. So, but I'll get back to you on the 0% view. But I just set that as a scene setter because that's perceptions of the parties. The reality is actual settlements over the last 6 months, right up to the end of November, signed off actual settlements in the private sector, unionized negotiated settlements are still on average above 4%.
Mm.
We have one or two individuals that are real outliers that settled as high as 15%, but there obviously must be some particular issues in play. And then we do have at the bottom end of the scale of the SNAP survey, the settlement was 2%. So that's the range. So, the average was still overall 4 plus. What's your view? I mean, generally, as from a Unite perspective and your personal perspective, being involved in bargaining, and obviously you guys are going to be involved in bargaining in early 2025. I
Mm.
think your fast food sector is kicking in quite early, right across the board. They normally all follow one after the other. So
Yeah.
what's your general view? I mean,
So I think the general view, the economic situation is different from what was a couple of years ago, and I think the realities of that are just becoming sort of clear now. Like the last few years with COVID was very turbulent, and changed dramatically, month by month. And we're sort of just coming to I think 2025 will be the year where it gets, there'll be a bit more clarity around the bargaining sort of rounds. And for Unite, we do have the major fast food agreements and some of the other hospitality ones all coming up in a bargaining round. So we'll be looking at that. The thing I think for us is there's objective parts of bargaining, or the context, and sort of more subjective sort of stuff. So the objective things of the economy, unemployment, no one firm can sort of change that, or one union can sort of that's just a reality that exists. But there's the things that we do have more control over, or that is more subjective. So what the employer wants to do, or in our for the union's perspective, what members are telling us. So even if an employer is making lots of money, or doing really well, and a union may want to have an ambitious sort of campaign, if that doesn't generate a response with members, then that won't go very far. But the same thing is for us. I think the interesting thing at the moment is there remains a real appetite and enthusiasm from union members for significant increases, and I think we've seen that, or what you're sort of talking about or getting at there is. Um, I think there was some perception of like over the last few years that when the labor market conditions with low unemployment and limits to migration, sort of that was definitely a factor that increased, led to some significant settlements. But if you only see that component part of it, then then yeah, it would be quite surprising to see, well, those factors have gone away, unemployment's much higher, so why are settlement ranges are being higher, or why are unions still coming with it with a higher expectations? And I think that's really worker led. And I think um, it's always a bit sort of hard and to sort of speak in sort of groups. Each person's individual motivations can be quite different, but I think there's a pent up sort of frustration around cost of living costs. So even if inflation, CPI may be tracking down, there can be a cumulative effect over the last few years that won't have been resolved for people. So even if this year's rent increases less than the last few years, rent is still very high and people are wanting relief from that. There's aspects of people have seen the COVID sort of period really changed the dynamic and raised a lot of expectations. So people have seen or been part of settlements that were much higher, which does mean that they are more inclined to expect that again next time. That if if they've been through a bargaining where they've received a 8, 9, 10% increase, there'll be a very limited appetite to go back to a 0, 1, or 2, irrespective of what people are, what the realities are. That'll just be people's lived experience. And so I think that those pressures on unions or on the bargaining table will continue to be, coming to the fore at bargaining next year.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. So therefore, I mean, your forecast for 2025 first 6 months as a range. I mean, I'm not asking you for a magic number. I mean, obviously, given some employers are still doing okay, some employers are genuinely struggling. I mean, what do you think the range is going to be in the first 6 months? Just, I'm not going to hold you to it. We're not going to come back and knock on the door and say you had it wrong, you lying, whatever, whatever.
Yeah,
What do you think
I
it's going to be?
I it's hard to say for us in the low paid industry. For us at Unite, we're looking at
Yeah.
more. living wages and progresses towards living wages. Now that'll affect different enterprises
Yeah,
very differently because there's some in the
yeah,
hospitality sector that are paying a higher rate, so that would be a lesser increase than others that are not. That will, put different pressures on different sort of enterprises.
mm,
Overall, I think that thing of being above inflation will be the sort of probably the pass mark of people still expecting
yeah,
increases.
yeah,
The thing as well, there's going to be an interesting dynamic of the public sector bargaining and the private sector bargaining. Now, those two things aren't directly linked, but they do create a context. And the indications are that the government is going to be very aggressive in the public sector negotiations. And what dynamic that sort of plays out is going to be um, interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think that'll be part of it as well. So I'm wary of being a person, but for us in hospitality, the magic thing will be living wages and pathways to living wages.
yeah,
And other than that, like I think for inflation or being able to go back and sell to members that they're keeping their nose, things are getting better, will be a core
yeah.
yeah thing for
Yeah.
us.
So, what we're seeing then in potentially is you're still going to be pushing ahead with a living wage as a starting wage, or the concept of the living wage being a fair wage. And the other bit attached to that is that, if a company is paying the living wage, the expectation from the members will probably be something marginally above the current CPI. I mean, when you get into bargaining, that's
Yeah.
potentially what's going to govern the range. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that would be the parameters of what union
Yeah.
success is looking like. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So therefore, the next question I asked you, or that I want to ask you is, do you think a 0% pay increase is an option? There are employers out
Mm.
there, I'm not going to mention names or even the sectors, but I can tell you hand on heart, in the last couple of months, we've had quite a few people phoning up saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not making any money. Things are looking crap. And in 2025, I mean, all indicators are it's still going to be a shitty year. I can't really afford any increase on wages, and I am contemplating 0%." And I'm going, What's your response to that? As a
Um,
good union person, what's your response? I mean, you can keep the middle finger tucked away, but
I mean the simple answer is that's not realistic. That's not what people sort of see. I think we are in interesting times where different sectors are radically different. So we do see, I think, the stuff and proposals around the Kinleith mill and the other mills and to talk about an industry that I don't know anything about. Um, but you can see that there's interesting market pressures applying elsewhere. The simple answer is that yeah, 0% is not possible, and that's going to be hard to take back to workers who have seen, generally speaking, with the supply chain pressures and things, businesses do very well over the last few years. It's then very hard for them to see things going well and then accept a limited increase. Um, but yeah, I think unions are in those sectors where there are real and demonstrable pressures. If that's transparent and that's sort of clear and that can be pointed to,
yeah,
then that unions are realistic and understand those pressures and want to find ways through to keep um, good jobs continuing. Yeah, but anyone who thinks that unemployment's higher, so therefore, jobs done, we gave you a good increase last time, so now it's our turn, would be very surprised if they have an expectation that that's just going to happen. Um, and it would need to be quite clear and it would need to be real. So the biggest way to have like long-term problems with the union, I think, is to cry poor, bargain down to a minimal increase, have the union suck it up, and then the next week the general manager turns up in a new Lexus. Um, that will just destroy trust and things long term. And that is not an uncommon experience, I think, in our view. So people being conscious, it needs to be real. And if you are expecting workers to be sucking it up and sort of taking one for the team, then that needs to be people need to be seeing that that's applied across an organization.
yeah. Do you think that the current sort of crisis around redundancies and job losses and job security, I mean, it's just going on and getting worse and worse. We understand, obviously, it's triggered off with the public sector and the very harsh approach, austerity approach that the government's taken. Has that, in your opinion, in the private sector now, does that impact on bargaining? Because I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of unemployed people out there, or not a lot, but there's more than usual. And there's employers saying, well, I can get someone to come and work for minimum wage because they just want a job. That's the sort of mindset. Do you think it's having a dampening effect
Um,
on bargaining?
it would have an effect. It's a factor. But my personal observation so far this year is it's having less of an effect than I would have expected.
Yeah.
That there still remains an appetite for significant increases, and that people have done that. And in some cases, that can drive more of an appetite. That if people in a family and they have other people in their family who are struggling or out of work, and seeking work, then that can mean that the breadwinners within that unit are under more pressure to get a better increase because they're trying to sustain and support more people.
Mm,
So yeah, it's not a direct that unemployment is up, so settlements will be lower. That it is a factor, and again, it hits different industries differently.
mm,
But I've been surprised by it not. Um, Dampening expectations and yeah, and that's not been um our experience here. Yeah, we haven't seen a drop off in union membership. If anything, it's possibly leading to people who are in work. But in Unite, in our experience, we've got a very young membership profile and a huge
mm,
turnover of union members.
mm,
In some ways, it means there's a whole range of our union delegates who are still working in fast food, who have finished their degrees, who 12 months ago wanted to be in the public service, who now can't. Those doors aren't open, so they're still in fast food, and then that means that for them to advance they want to move on with their lives, and that they're maybe in their mid-20s, they want to start having some more access, more disposable income, start saving for a house or whatever. The jobs they thought were and expected to be in are not there right now. So the
mm,
focus then becomes, well, how do I make the job that I do have better?
mm,
And so it can be in unpredictable sort of ways, or ways you wouldn't expect, actually, yeah, drive union organization and union pressure on unions to get better settlements.
mm. Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. Interest-based bargaining. I mean, it's been around for a long time. And it comes in different guises, like high performance, high engagement, that version, that's basically interest-based bargaining. And there's lots of other versions with different labels. Um, Interest-based bargaining, basically, the underlying theory is if we all identify a common interest and then go into bargaining, we'll have a much more constructive and meaningful discussion and end up with a settlement that works for both parties. I mean, it's a very romantic notion, and obviously has been proven to work exceptionally well in with certain employers, both in New Zealand and obviously offshore. Tends to work it tends to work better in highly unionized environments where the union membership is sort of 80% plus. But that's just, from observation. But what's your view? I mean, interest-based bargaining, remember, the economy's in the crapper at the moment, for whatever reason. It looks as if it's not going to dramatically change in 2025. Do you think interest-based bargaining can help in this particular scenario?
Um, Definitely can do if there's a genuine willingness to engage, probably from both sides, to be fair, for the union sort of thing. And if there can be um, good communication, good understanding about, and respective understanding of both the where things align and also the differences of what the different parties are trying to achieve. It is a dynamic you sort of wish to get into, a sort of mutual respect and understanding, I think, and for the unions to be respected on its own terms. Um, I don't think it's a method that's a solution outside of a strong relationship, and can lead to having those sort of approaches where that understanding and mutual respect is not there. it can be just as complicated as other things. And to be honest, also just um having a old school, we're at the table, you want this, I want that, let's figure out what's going to work, get out of the room as quickly as possible and talk to each other as least as possible can work fine. If it's a more, in some ways, I think there's an honesty and respect sort of thing. Like that can be a very honest relationship.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, an interest-based bargaining, if there is a lack of trust and things, wrapping that up and trying to things can actually just lead to bigger frustrations. If a union goes to a lot of work, if there's a predetermined decision that's been made around a restructuring or something, to engage the union or workers in a
mm,
convoluted and long consultation process that then changes nothing,
mm,
just leads to greater frustration and further disengagement in a workplace.
mm,
Um, so I would almost advise against doing a long process that's disingenuous and isn't going to change anything is not helpful. But if you are open to that and to meaningfully having feedback, then it's very helpful and does
mm,
yeah lead to greater engagement and
mm,
can lead to good outcomes.
mm. Yeah, I mean, as you highlighted, the key element of all of this is trust. I mean, there's got to be a fairly high degree of trust, and that takes time to develop that. So, yeah, I tend to agree with you. I just read when I was looking at what's happening in the EU and Germany specifically, one of their biggest unions coined the phrase that the economy is so bad and the politicians over there have stuffed things up that the unions, and these are some of the big unions, IG Metall and some of the other big ones, where you're looking at union membership close on 1 million people, workers. So it's big stuff. But the national secretary of one of their big unions over there coined this, things are so bad. As a union, we've now had to progress from collective bargaining to collective begging. And I thought, I found that quite amusing because those unions in the EU, in France and Germany are huge and they have a lot of clout. So, but for them to start saying that, I mean, do you feel that the current economy in New Zealand, high unemployment, we've discussed this already, but I mean, high unemployment, bad economy, public sectors in turmoil, people are quite negative. 2025 is viewed as not much change. Employers are starting to look at their cash flow and going, oh, I can't afford any increases. I mean, as a union, do you think I mean, collective begging is like pushing it, I would assume, but
Yeah, I think that situation is probably unique, or that's going to be a more relevant framework for the challenge that a German metal workers and manufacturing unions are facing. So for them,
yeah,
there's broader
yeah,
economic stuff where they're desperate to keep the industry alive, and the industry is. I haven't been following it closely, but
yeah,
broadly speaking, the employers are indifferent. Like and can see that they would like to relocate manufacturing to Eastern Europe or elsewhere, and
yeah,
to pursue a better profit. So in that sort of circumstance where and it ties into, there's these big legacy sort of agreements, that yeah, the survival of the industry becomes a lot more of a complex sort of thing, and they've achieved a certain sort of power where they are a party to how the industry sort of functions and
yeah,
things.
yeah.
So for Unite, and in a lot of cases of a lot of unions here, we don't have that density and that sort of strength.
Yeah, but if I can I
Yeah.
just
Mm,
interrupt you on that one in the sense that if you look at what's happening at Kinleith and the pulp and
mm.
paper and manufacturing, there's an element of that industry is vanishing. So the people that are still there, I mean, it's quite problematic. I mean, isn't there an
Yeah.
element of collective bargaining is not going to change anything, or potentially could change a lot?
Yeah. Well, definitely, and I think that's well, it gets into very political sort of issues. So I think in those sort of industries like
Yeah.
wood and or previously at Marsden Point, or there was a lot of discussions around down with Rio Tinto and the aluminium smelter at Bluff. Uh, these sort of big industrial sort of sectors where yeah, New Zealand plays a strange role in the global economy. We are a
Mm,
small part of it, but we've got these
mm,
sort of onshore sort of things.
mm,
Um, the future of those industries will be, it's a lot more of a complex sort of situation because it's sort of, and it ties pretty quickly. I think if you're getting to that sort of point, then like it gets into political, like an industrial policy.
Mm,
So if it's at the point where, yeah, the survival of entire industries is being discussed at bargaining, like that is a factor, and unions want to engage in that with employers
mm,
on that, but that is going to be very hard to resolve those issues without the other party and the other parties being government really to get that gets into trade settings and all sorts of frameworks around that and there's
mm,
global ownership stuff so that yeah the Marsden Point smelter was
mm,
profitable in and of itself but you can increase the margins if you by
mm,
when it's part of a global supply chain, it doesn't make economic sense in a global sense
mm,
to refine here when you downsize that facility, incorporate it into a global supply chain.
mm,
Um, that was just not going to yeah, that can't be that problem can't be resolved at bargaining
mm,
really, because
mm,
that's a much bigger sort of bigger piece. But I think unions are in those sort of circumstances, unions are or should be really open to being creative and trying to find ways to
mm,
exercise those levers of power. And I think where that's been done really effectively, I'd say in the past has been in the like care and support sector with some of the equal pay settlements and the
mm, mm,
collaboration between some employers and the unions, to PSA and the nurses around
mm,
achieving settlements to increase wages, which yeah, the employers weren't opposed to, but it was a funded industry, so they needed to
mm,
yeah, the that money needed to come from somewhere.
mm,
And that maybe those sort of ways of doing things tend towards the public sector, but it's not unique to that. And
mm,
where
mm,
you are facing industry-wide sort of issues and things,
mm.
it's a lot to go to if the solution to it is that this is not economical, so we're going to go to bargaining. You need to accept reduced wages. Um, is going to be hard to swallow, particularly if that's the only avenue and
Yeah.
only thing that's sort of being there.
Mm,
Yeah, and especially if there's bigger stuff, because yeah, with a Kinley like well Marsden Point's sort of gone now as an example. Maybe that you can save a factory for a few years by deferring some pay increases, but if those bigger picture issues aren't resolved, then you're just deferring the pain and
mm,
the problems. And it's putting a lot to sacrifice on workers in an enterprise when there's not necessarily other people aren't pulling their weight.
mm, mm,
Yeah, so if you're looking to put it into a framework that can at least try to find other solutions and things as part of that,
mm,
then unions
mm.
are very keen to play a role in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
So looking at Unite 2025 and you as a union, you guys
mm,
are predominantly in the hospitality industry. You've got a couple of big collectives coming up in the fast food sector. Um, what do you think for employers in those sectors? What's the best way for management to engage with Unite, with the union in this current environment, knowing full well if we look at the macro picture,
mm,
tough economic environment, everyone's going, we got no money, we got no money. From a management perspective, the mindset is increases need to be low and blah blah blah. Um, what do you think the best way as a union person representing Unite and knowing full well you're going to go into negotiations, the management's going to have not say every management's the same, and I am generalizing, but I mean, management's outlook is probably going to be quite tight before the bargaining. So, what's the best
mm.
approach for a manage? What's your advice to management in hospitality and fast food for 2025 when I knock on the door? Hi, my name is Ben Peterson. I'm here to start bargaining for a wage increase. What's your advice?
Well, just listen to good arguments and sort of be experimental, but
Yeah.
putting aside like listening to like I think we take an industry approach. We don't want to beat up. We want to facilitate and protect good employment in hospo, and we want to isolate and undermine bad employment practices. We're not coming for anyone in particular.
Mm,
And some of the employers that we, because there's a different parts to our sort of strategies, part of it is the fast food campaigns were established, but we also have already started, and will be doing more so of moving into other large and medium-sized hospitality employers, which I won't sort of name here, but more people will be, hearing from us. Because the industry as a whole, a living wage industry in hospitality is viable. We've seen some employers do that. We do appreciate it's difficult at the moment, but it is a viable industry. But can't have islands of good that then are undermined by problems elsewhere.
Mm,
And we need to have an industry where that can be protected, where it's a good career, where it's a good sort of jobs. And we can't do that when there's dog eat dog sort of situation where everyone, anyone who tries to respect the chefs and give them a meaningful career to good wages then gets undermined by, the pub across the road.
mm,
So people need to trust that it's a process that we're going on.
mm,
We are also we are going to come with ambitious asks, but we are also realistic.
mm,
Um, we may seem cocky. Unite has a track record of achieving significant change in the industry. So,
mm,
0 hour contracts were, when that campaign started, was meant to be something that was just part and parcel of hospitality. You couldn't run a fast food restaurant without
mm,
a highly casualized workforce, and now that's not the case. People have a lot more security in their work, and it's
mm,
works fine.
mm,
In the past, youth wages was again a part and parcel of fast food, that you have a 15-year-old there on lower wages than others. That's no longer part of the industry.
mm,
Um, so we're very confident that if we embark on a journey, we will get there. And it's about negotiating the time and the frameworks and how that sort of happens. So we want to, a living wage in hospitality might not happen overnight. I'm not,
mm,
yeah, I don't want to undercut my own but before bargaining started, but I'm not sure that
mm,
you'll be halfway through next year with a universal 150,000 people in hospo all on living wages. But if we can start to build in pathways to that,
mm,
that'll be it. So don't freak out. Don't get. I think that in terms of for HR or for employers, it's not personal. We are going to change things. We've got a good track record on that. Engage with us and. Yeah, and let us know. Yeah, engage with us. But yeah, we do have we do have an agenda. We will be working towards that agenda. Yeah, and it won't just be you. It'll be others as well. So yeah, if you don't want to, we're looking for good employers to prop up, and um, other targets to sort of to highlight problems in the industry, and we want to work with everyone to keep them on one list and not the other.
Thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate your candid comments and some very wise advice for some employers. And thank you for your time.
Cool. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah.
Cool.